Hello everybody, welcome to video lesson 4. In this video we're going to be talking about data standards. We're covering that part of the course description that is a survey of current emerging technology applications and data standards in healthcare industry. So we're really putting the focus on data standards. Okay, so if you work in the field in any capacity with healthcare IT, in a financial department, anything with administration, their data standards are going to come to you. You're going to have to understand some part of it. So what we're going to learn today is not so much how to conform to data standards, but to give you some familiarization with what data standards are and a couple of terms that you may hear again in the future. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is define data, because if we're going to do standards, we got to know what we're talking about. So what is data? Data is the dates, numbers, images, symbols, letters, words that represent basic facts and observations about people, processes, measurements, and conditions. And that's the HEMA version of what data is. They give us this long, kind of drawn out. But the idea is that you understand that it's a series or a bunch of information or bunch of datum put together, and we're gonna see this here in a second. So data is the plural noun for many pieces of information. Okay, datum is the singular form. So if we look at the example on the left, female is a piece of datum, right? It's datum. And so is hypertensive, and so is the blood pressure, and the BMI. These are all datum. These are single pieces of information. And data, as opposed to datum, data is the entire set of entries for a single patient in an electronic health record, or a set of information such as all the information you might see on a claim, or an entire vital statistics repository. You might see a lot of data that are collected. It's the whole of it all is the data itself. So beyond that, we have to look at data versus information. So you have datum, which is a singular form of data, and data, which is multiple pieces of datum, right? And so now we're gonna carry that one step farther to data versus information. So there's a little bit of a difference. Data are the facts or details from which information is derived. And if you think about it, though, individual pieces of data are rarely useful alone. So if we look at this example, this is the data or datum. Mary Jones is a 43-year-old female with COPD. Now that's a little close to being information. But Mary Jones is 43-year-old female and COPD combined. Those are data. But just below that, you have COPD. That is datum. Hypertensive is datum. BMI is datum, etc. So, but for this all to become information, we have to put it into context. So if we put the whole picture into information, we have Mary Jones is a 43-year-old female with COPD. She is hypertensive. This has a lot of meaning. It has structure, and it's meaningful to any kind of healthcare provider or anyone that's going to be looking at this particular record. So information is pretty important. It's just a matter of putting data together. So the standards, data standards are foundational to the development, implementation, and interoperability of electronic health records. This becomes important when certain systems are trying to communicate with each other. You just kind of have to think about if data is going to be transmitted from the tablet to a computer system in one department to a computer system in another department. They all have to be able to communicate between each other. The format that comes out of one system, maybe a different piece of software, has to be structured so that the other systems can understand it, so that the message that's being sent is the message that's being received. So here's an example of how this could be a problem. If you think of these A, B, and C as three different hospitals, let's say, and at hospital A they have an electronic medical record, and in their system the patient's gender is set up so that that a 1 equals male and that a 0 equals female. That's the way the system's set up. And let's say at hospital B, we could even put it in the context of A is New Hanover, B is, let's say, Dosher, and C is Pender. Okay, so let's say over at Dosher at hospital B, in their system they have, we'll say, patient's gender 0 is male and 1 is female. So if somebody that was last seen at New Hanover got into a wreck over in Southport, and then Dosher, they went to Dosher Medical Center, Dosher Hospital, and they needed to get records from New Hanover, their systems might not be compatible. So there has to be something in between to help them out. So if you think about it, so if they put in male and the machine language sends a 1 or a 0, and the receiving end of it, they don't get a 1 or 0, don't have a 1 or 0 set up like that, then there's going to be a problem. And we could say that A and B or Dosher New Hanover, their systems are different syntactically because they both have male and female, but they're not syntactically set up to communicate with each other correctly. All right, so and now if we go out to Pender at C, theirs is a little bit different, we'll say, and they have the male, female, and unknown, which today that could be a thing. But if they try to send an unknown gender information over to New Hanover, it won't work because the New Hanover system doesn't have the unknown identifier. So A and C different, or we can say Pender and New Hanover differ semantically. So Pender cannot represent the concept, or I'm sorry, New Hanover can't represent the concept of the unknown. They don't have it. So those are two different ways that information could be a problem. They could be syntactically different or semantically different. So standards are commonly created by 4 basic methods. There's 4 basic methods, and some of these terms or some of these examples we have gone over in previous videos. The first one is ad hoc, and this is just a group of people that have come together and they agree upon a standard. Like DICOM was in radiology, so all the radiology folks said, look, we need to make sure that we're getting those male and female patients correct between systems. So they put together an ad hoc group and came up with some standards that are now universal, pretty much, DICOM. De facto, this is where the marketplace, competition, and technology introduce a de facto standard. It's something that just kind of comes about because of its existence. For example, Windows, or the PDF file, if you think about that, or QWERTY. Do you know what QWERTY is? If you look at your keyboard, it's the top row letters, QWERTY. So it's just you can look it up. Okay. So number 3 is the government mandate. These are those standards that the government sets up. All right. HIPAA, the ANSI, the ISO. We'll touch on a couple of these, and the Nationwide Health Information Network. And this one's important because this is more recent. And it's a set of standards, services, and policies that enables secure health information exchange over the internet. And the thing to understand about the National Health Information Network is that it is not a physical thing. It is a set of standards. Okay, but it's where we ultimately want to get to the point where if you get in an accident anywhere in the United States, your medical record may be accessible through the network, this Nationwide Health Information Network. But we may get to that a little bit later. And then 4 is a consensus. A formal consensus occurs. HL7 and the most recent version of HL7 is FHIR, F-H-I-R. So let's take a look. So Health Information Transaction Standards, also called interchange standards, are standards for the transmission of health information data between two parties. So this is really just taking that information and making it syntactically and semantically the same between organizations. And it's really difficult and challenging. So there's always some sort of an update. And some of the different types of transaction standards that we're going to look at for a moment are ASC X125010, the NCPDP, and HL7. So these are some terms that you may hear in the future in the field. Okay, so transaction standards. This is the ASC. All right, so the Accredited Standards Committee X12 5010 standard. All right, so I remember when 3010 went to 5010, because it was a real big deal because we lost a lot of revenues for about a full quarter. And in any case, what it is that the syntax and semantics from one side to the other have to be in a certain format. And so this is just an example of it to the right. You're not going to have to learn this kind of stuff, but you would need to be familiar with Accredited Standards Committee X12 5010. So when you hear it, you know that it has something to do with claims processing. Okay, it has everything to do with claims processing. The 270 is an inquiry, 271 is a response, but like I said, we don't need to get into the details of that. Another is the National Council for Prescription Drug Programs, NCPDP. And if you look at the example on the left, you remember how we used to do prescriptions. The doctor used to write them out. They kind of looked like that. Couldn't really read them. So it became very important once we went to electronic medical records, especially with e-prescribing, that the standards be compatible, everything to be semantically and syntactically correct. All right, so one of the things that kind of changed it all too was this NDC, National Drug Code. So if you're in the field, you'll hear that again for sure. National Drug Code, I think it's 10 digits. Can't really tell by this example, but just know that that's out there. All right, HL7, we've kind of gone over this previously, and it has a variety of standards, including their messaging standards, supporting the interchange of data between software applications between providers. These can be set up between those disparate systems where, for example, New Hanover has the Epic system, and we'll say that their emergency department has software that is specific to the emergency department, but it's not Epic system software. Those two have to be able to talk to each other. They have to be semantically and syntactically compatible. And to do that, we can input this HL7 interface between them that will make them talk to each other the way they're supposed to. So that 1 and 0 male to female we put in this HL7 interface that switches that up for them going either way. And so the two systems can communicate. So this is what HL7 looks like this is a result of HL7. Again, we don't need to know how to do it. We just need to know that it exists. And I wanted you to have some sort of a picture of it, what it might look like. So if you see it in the future, oh yeah, it's HL7. So let's get to those quiz questions and get through this. Mary Jones is a 43-year-old female with COPD. What is this an example of? This is an example of information. Okay, I know the data. Like I said, there's a fine line between data and information. And for testing purposes, we're going to say that this is in context, and that I'm not going to give you a trick question that says, is this information or data? I'm not going to do that to you. It'd just be kind of cruel. But this is going to be considered information. That's going to be the answer to that question. Second question, a group of interested parties come together and agree upon a standard. Those go back to those 4 methods of standards. This is going to be the ad hoc method. All right, it's the ad hoc method of creating standards. A group of interested parties come together. Marketplace competition and technology introduced this type of standard. This is going to be de facto. Remember the Windows systems, PDF files, that kind of thing. When it comes to electronic transaction standards in healthcare, what does NCPDP? And if you recall, this had something to do with prescriptions, right? So if you see all those P's, maybe you just think of prescriptions. But it's the National Council for Prescription Drug Programs. That's what that means. And then the 5th question, ask ASC X125010 is used by providers and insurance companies for what? Now, if you think about it, if it's used by an insurance company, claims should come to mind, some sort of payment system. So that's what you're going to be looking for there. All right, so that's it for this week for this for the video 4 lesson. And this week we're also going to have the discussion activities, so be sure you do that. And when you're doing these discussion activities, be sure you put some substance in those discussions so that it has meaning to it. Sometimes I like to use those for additional discussion or test questions. Okay, so be sure that you put some substance into it. I like to see a little bit of effort.